Yes. Okay. Recording
So
started.
Gary, I gotta kick. And so yeah, so I guess we got Tony and Alex in here as well. Jose should be here in a bit. So the idea was we just wanted to have like, a session every month where you guys get to ask us some random hands, just random questions. There's a lot of weird stuff in poker, even things outside of hand questions. Like if you guys want to know random things about me and Marco, like, what's our pregame ritual? What's our biggest downswing? Biggest score? Just any question is cool because the idea is, that's why we're your coaches, so you guys can ask us some of these questions that people want to know about it, because poker is a strange game. Like we've been through a lot of stuff. We've seen people go through a lot of stuff. So, we're all honest here, and whatever you guys want to talk about, that's kind of the idea. We just want to be able to help you all. So, that's just kind of the idea for these once a month type sessions. Right now we want to start with some hands, obviously, because right here we have Gary's hand from our home game main event yesterday. I got a kick out of seeing this right off the bat. You sent this to me earlier. I took a glance at it. So a little background, Marco. This guy Crack Kills, as you can see by his avatar of the Dave Chappelle Crack Fiend character, he plays kind of like the name sounds. Like he is one of the craziest people in our league by far. I saw this spot. I'm actually kind of curious to hear what Marco says about this because I didn't know exactly what to do here. I felt like this was a little strange, I don't really like shoving because I'm not sure there's much fold equity. I don't love folding when you're getting a decent price to set mine, but I also don't love calling because it's kind of too much of our stack too, right? So I feel like this is just in between a ton of options. Marco, what's your take on this spot? I was really torn here when I glanced at this.
Well, obviously, like the first instinct here is when you see this, you just cross out your mind, right? I mean, it was like, okay, versus button, he has a lot of stack. Maybe he has some 3-bet fold range. I'm not sure if this villain, like you said, he's crazy. So he definitely has 3-bet folds, right? That's probably the first thing I would start thinking. Could this guy 3-bet me with something and fold? If this is a guy who's just going to 3-bet tens and ace king, ace queen off, and he's just happy to call you off, obviously fold, snap fold. But like we know, he's Crack Kills. So that changed the situation. Crazy, So now it's like, okay, if he just 3-bets, we are super happy with this hand. We are just shoving. We are all in. But now the big blind calls. Actually, tendencies of bad players. I don't know who this guy is. So he's part of.
It's Vicky. So I know Vicky, and
she's tight.
To call.
She's tight. Okay, then I don't think shoving would be good ever, because like what is the you need to consider like what is the flatting range? Is this like 9s plus always? Yes. Like
I would say like when I saw her flat, immediately what popped into my brain was 7-7, 8-8, 9-9, 10-10, Jack-Jack. Ace queen suited. Like that's what popped in my head. Like I think that she has a hand where her brain was like, my hand's not good enough to move all in, but it's too good to fold. So like she's in that zone right in between. So to me, that means her instinct is like 9s and 10s, ace queen suited, just like really stick out to me as the hands that the human brain will be like, my hand is too good to fold, yet I'm uncomfortable moving all in with it. And I think that's where she is sitting right now, because I believe if she had aces or kings or queens, she would just see this in front of her and just move all in, or ace king, So that makes me think that she's right under that with like jacks, 10s, 9s, ace queen suited.
Okay, yeah, makes a lot of sense. In that case, like if I saw this was like recreational player, the games I play, if you do some database study on this, you are shocked to see that. I'm not sure exactly with 20 big blinds, but like if recreational player flats you here, it does not mean strength. Actually, it's a lot of hands like deuces, 3s, 4s, 5s. It's all the hands. And once in a blue moon, you will have aces. They will flat aces too, but they will usually shove the range like 10s, jacks, queens, stuff like that. But they will call all the worst bottom pairs. So actually, if this guy was like recreational fun player, I think it's all in, because they will still call you with deuces, 3s, 4s, 5s, actually. That's the funny thing. But that's kind of what the database research have told me.
I will say this, though. I have noticed that I think, looking at a demographic type study, I've noticed that older crowd tend to play their small pairs less, I believe. Like, I believe, and, not knowing too much about her, I think if she had 2s through 6s, I think she would snap fold. I think that what we're seeing here is that she is. I also agree wholeheartedly what you said, though, that she's never got the nuts, right? Like if we shove here, I'm more worried probably of Crack calling us at this point. But also one of the problems is that he might even call us with some of his bluffs with how much money would be out there, right? Like if he had King Jack suited, like he might gamble with us, right?
Yep.
That would be a problem.
I mean,
something
for that
Marco
price,
said. Yeah, I was gonna say something Marco said earlier, Gary, that really stands out to me. Like when you're making these decisions, Marco mentioned, is he raise folding or not? Like, so that's the idea. You have to be like, is he like, do I have fold equity, right? Like, and if you have something like 7s or 8s and there's no fold equity, we have to be careful because that means they will call us 100% of the time. And it sounds like we end up flipping a lot in those spots. So like when you're jamming with 7s or 8s, you really want your opponent to be folding a good chunk of the time. There needs to be fold equity there. Like picture this scenario where you had 2,000 chips more and Vicky never calls. Okay, so it's just you open to 800, Crack goes 2,400, actions back to us with 10,000 chips. That should be an easy all in for us because the idea is that he is 3-bet bluffing most of the time here, right? We know he's aggressive, he's crazy, he's got a lot of chips, and he's on the button. So when you add all those things up, it means he's more likely to be 3-bet bluffing. So if that's the case, I just like shoving with your 25 blinds. And I'm super confident knowing that he's just folding a lot of the time, right? But here, when you're only down to 22 blinds, it's a little like ambiguous, right? Like he might even just have King Jack and he was bluffing at first and he goes, screw it, I'm going to call, right? So like that's where it starts getting a little delicate and we have to be careful with the how much fold equity do we actually have? And that's one of the most important questions you should ask yourself in spots like this. Like, is there a chance they're folding? Like how much fold equity do I have? And then you go from there. And if there's none, I'm very careful in spots like this.
So basically you're saying Vicky would never fold here, right?
Well, no, that's what's interesting. So if we shove and Crack folds, I'm actually with you. I think Vicky folds more than she calls us. However,
Really?
I do worry that she has a fair amount of 9-9, 10-10, Jack-Jack, ace-queen suited. And I believe if Crack folds, she's going to sigh and call at that point. Maybe not even feeling like she has the best hand, but just feeling kind of pot committed at that point. But I am with you. I would be shocked if she had queens plus, ace king plus in this spot.
Yeah.
But I'd also be shocked if she had under the 5s, So I feel like that's why I feel like it's this very narrow range.
Yeah,
in between
that's why I want to point out exactly like this is like the database read on like online for very funny players. This is not how any competent player will play. They are not flatting here deuces to 6s or even 7s, to be honest. I don't think 8s, like 9s, even 9s, like I think it's just push fold decision to me.
For sure. And on to Marco's point, Gary, a good rule of thumb for you. I honestly tell a lot of students just never cold flat a 3-bet. Like there are going to be a couple spots where it makes sense, like, and what I mean by cold flatting a 3-bet, like you open, Crack 3-bets, Vicky cold flatted the 3-bet, right? I don't think there's any hand that makes sense to do that where she is. Like to me, I just pick a line and I'm all in with all that. And then I'm folding all of that. Like, I don't think I'd call anything here. Like Marco, do you think there's any hand that would be reasonable to call in this spot?
It's kind of, I guess, from exploitative standpoint, but like, again, when we look at like, for example, solvers, the problem is when you're the guy like Vicky, actually, is it late? I guess it's a lady.
Yeah, Vicky's a girl. Yeah.
So if you're a lady,
weird name for a guy, right? Yeah.
But if you're a guy or lady, whatever you are, the solvers don't like to call in position when you have still one player behind, because now you need to remind that what is your equity versus the Crack kills with 7s? Probably 50-50 or something. But what if when the guy behind you call, that then is like 33, 35, whatever, right? He kills your equity. So you do not want to call in positions where your equity is killed by the other guy. So for example, here, if you call with 8s, you absolutely destroy the guy calling here the 3-bet, right? So
and you're forcing his hand to call too, because when they call, it makes the other person call more, right?
Exactly. Like then the person who opened, they are not really falling that much because they kind of have to call too for the price, and so it's not something solver wants, and it makes sense. Like the person behind you will kill you with their equity. Simple as that. So
Yeah.
that's why this is kind of like those, and the stack size is so small. Yeah, I think this is just pre-flop game for me mostly. If you want to trap your aces here, if you think that's going to gain you more money, if let's say if this is a spot like, because like think about it like this perspective. If you're seen as a very, very tight player, if you jam, everybody folds, even queens, right? If you're seen as like the tightest player in the world. But if you call and somebody still hits their king with ace king or king queen, they might still have difficulties to fold post flop, right? Like if they hit top pair, it's tough to fold, especially when you only have like stack pot ratio of like pot size left, right? Like even if you hit the top pair, it's tough to fold. Like even for me, I'm like, oh God, this is the tightest guy ever, but I only get lost by aces, like.
Yes. Okay, so something Marco just said there that's super helpful, Gary. Now, he's right that in Vicky's seat, I think flatting aces would be reasonable. And it's only if she's saying, you know what, I think Crack is just full of shit here, to be honest. And if I move all in, he's going to fold. So I'm just going to call. Gary is going to be forced to call. And then I'm in position. Crack is just going to put me all in on the flop. It's risky, but it's totally reasonable. Now, to Marco's point, what he was just saying, a spot where it would be really effective for you would be, let's say you're in the big blind, okay? And let's say someone opens from like earlier middle position and you have aces in the big blind. That's a spot where I would probably just slow play my aces and just flat call. Because if you suddenly 3-bet from the big blind there, you're going to look really strong. Like you're going to really set off some warning signals to your opponent, right? However, if you just smooth call, he's going to be like, oh, he's defending with anything, right? And say you only have like 20, 25 blinds left, you smooth call, you check flop, they c-bet, you check shove all in. It will never look like aces. You know what I'm saying? So like what Marco was getting at is the idea is that you don't want to shove in a spot with aces where it looks like you have aces, right? So those are the spots where we might have to be careful and just consider calling. In actuality, it's definitely gonna be riskier, but I think like the idea is think of the perception, like how you're perceived. I also like how Marco mentioned the idea of like, if you've been really tight and you suddenly move all in, it just kind of looks like you have aces, right? So you have to be careful about that perception angle.
I actually yesterday did have aces in the big blind one time, and it folds all the way around and only the small blind called. So I just checked them.
Which is fine. I think that's reasonable. Yeah, because you're probably going to look somewhat strong. And it's not like like I would raise if you thought the small blind was capable of like limp raising or something. But in actuality, in our game, it's usually just someone limp folding, right?
Yeah. So then the small blind, let out. It was a crappy flop, just a bunch of, it was like a rainbow junk. The small blind could have had 2 pairs, but it was very doubtful. And so the small blind let out and I called. The small blind checked. I bet like a third of the pot and the small blind folded, and that was the end of it.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. You can maybe even bet a little bit more on the turn. I mean, I don't know what the exact board texture is, but I think in general, and we talk about this too a lot, the idea that there's no standard sizing and we want you guys to be flexible with your sizing, and do stuff for a reason. But if you just had to broadly put sizings like into like kind of a vacuum, you'd see a lot of 1/3 on the flop, maybe like half to 60% on the turn, So I think in that spot, maybe I'd go a little bit bigger and you hope for him to have top pair and that they will pay you off, right? And like you said, if it's a messed up board, they might not even fold middle pairs, right? Also, I might not go a third there because if he suddenly check raised you, that would be super peculiar with pocket aces, right? So yeah, I'd say in general, again, I have no idea what the board texture was, but typically I size up a little bit more on turn. Do you think that's a fair thing to say, Marco, as a broad rule?
Sorry, I was just taking this over. So
no, you're good. I was just talking about sizing up turn a little bit. He slow played aces pre in a fine spot. He called the c-bet from the guy, and then the guy checked turn to him, and he bet a third, and the guy folded. And I was saying that line sounds good. I might even consider betting a little bit bigger on the turn, though. Without knowing the texture, does that make sense or seem reasonable?
I think so, especially in spot where you're just so under-rep, right? Like the guy never thinks you have aces. So in that sort of spots, like especially like small blind versus big blind, which is kind of interesting dynamic actually, because like nobody ever really has anything, to be honest. Like when you have so wide ranges, you have to think about like poker in general. You hit like 1/3 of the flops, right? You almost never hit anything. So when you have that many hands, most of the time it's a game of how do you say, game of chicken, like chicken or egg, which was the first, you know. I mean, who's gonna bet first will probably win first, like
Yeah.
win the hand. I mean, it's kind of foolish, but yeah, these small bets probably overwork versus population or how people are playing today, because like they just have so many automatic falls basically.
Yeah. And Gary, another good one, you know, we talk about perception a lot too. Think of like where this battle is taking place. Like when he checks to you and you bet on the turn in a blind versus blind battle, there is such a higher propensity for you to just be full of it and stabbing, right? Like there is a different dynamic, small blind versus big blind, than like under the gun opening and then small blind flatting. Like that to me would be the least dynamic, where UTG looks strong and then the small blind also looks strong as well. Does that make sense? Like, so, but in blind versus blind, there's this idea that everyone is just like trying to steal, you know? So I think the ranges feel a lot wider in that spot too.
True. Okay.
Yeah, true. So based on this eights hand, just more looking at it, this spot, for example, looking at PokerSnowy would flat here, nines, tens, jacks, queens sometimes, ace queen suited, ace jack suited, ace king off. But again, what we should point it out here, you should never flat ace king off here because like, but again, first we should look at this hand. This is looking at in a perspective of kind of like GTO or very close to optimal. We
and
know
that there's
crack
no
kills
fold equity, right?
Crack kills is definitely out of line. We know that. So these hands probably are all ins, I believe. Like all the hands I just mentioned, ace jack suited, nines, you can probably just shove it in very profitably. So first of all, there's no point flatting, right? When you can just shove so profitably here. Then I put here just like ranges like we open 23%. It doesn't really matter what we open. But then button three bets like, let's say 11%, which is still not like crazy. And then he has 6.6% call range, like ace jack off, ace 10 suited, nines plus, which is already a bit wider, you know, if he's a bit looser player. And then we have like, basically we can call in this kind of like sevens to tens, ace jack, ace queen off, aces range. So based versus that range, we should be shoving basically with nines plus, ace king off, ace queen suited basically. So that would be our range. But like I said, these sort of situation, how do you define the ranges here? Because like this is such a special spot. So to be honest, my tip would be here, play a bit tighter than what you would like. Don't make like big assumptions here, because like Vicky's range, you probably have no idea what it is in reality, right? Like this is such an awkward spot, which almost never happens. So I think I would be a bit more solid here. So I think folding eights is totally fine. But yeah, I think like nines plus sounds good to me. Maybe tens if there's more like ICM situation going. If this looks like this is kind of deep, right? Or is this, how many tables left? Or is this the last?
There were two tables. So yeah, we had 27 players and I think we were at 13 or 14 when this hand happened.
Okay. How many makes money?
5.
5, yeah.
Okay, so maybe we can discuss even tens and maybe the ace queen suited. I mean, but I could never blame you going here with ace queen suited, because also I think the crack kills is probably a bit more out of line than the 11%. So yeah, I think shoving nines plus ace queen suited, ace king off. If you jam ace queen off, ace jack suited, that's fine too, I think. So.
And I think when it comes to hands like eights and nines, the fold equity is so key, because like the worst is if you shove eights and then he flips over king jack off, or like king 10 suited and it's a flip and he was bluffing and then you don't have enough chips to make him fold. Like that is when things get really problematic, right? So I think the first thing you have to think of when you have eights, nines, tens, just be like, is there fold equity? Because you need him to be folding X amount of the time for you to justify moving all in essentially, you know? So whether or not there's fold equity is huge. And then, you know, again, like look at tendencies, like think to yourself, like, why is this person 3-betting me, right? And so I see aggressive player on the button with the chip lead. When I add those three things up, he just is going to look bluffier to me. You know what I'm saying? But say you open under the gun and someone with like 25 blinds, 3-bets under the gun +1 next to you. Well, that now to me looks like they are insanely strong. It's because like, why would they bluff there, right? Their stack size is short. Their position is bad. we look strong. So to me, that is just their cards are super strong and they're making it, very obvious for me. So let's pretend Vicky didn't call here and it's just you and Crack in this spot, right? And let's say you had, again, like 2,000 chips more, just like 5 blinds more, right? I think you could really comfortably move all in. When you go 800, he goes 2,400 with these stack sizes. I'd be pretty comfortable moving all in with like 7s plus, ace 10 plus, king queen plus in that spot, because I feel he is folding so often, right? But then when you change stuff a little bit, right? Now it's different. So like, let's say you open under the gun with 8s and then someone 3-bets off 25 blinds next to you. Well, now I'm snap folding the 8s because I'm terrified. Hell, I'm probably folding 9s there and ace queen there as well. And my shoving range is going to look more like ace king, like 10s or jacks plus. And it's because in that spot, I don't think they're bluffing ever. So I don't want to jam into a strong value range.
Makes sense. Yep.
Yeah, but very, very interesting hand actually. But yeah, versus Crack Kills, what sort of percentage, like how out of line do you guys think he is? Are we talking about like 20% 3-bet range here, or is it like 10%, 15?
He has a really wide range. He has a very wide range.
He's out of line, and like this is the thing. So he's really out of line, but he also doesn't like 3-bet a ton. You know what I'm saying? Like the aggressive people in our league are more like they call a lot, they open limp a lot. So he doesn't do a ton of 3-betting. However, my brain is seeing still as him as the chip leader, him on the button, him wanting to put pressure on Gary. It feels to me like a spot where even though he doesn't 3-bet a ton, it just looks like a textbook 3-bet bluff from a player like him is what I would think, So like, that's the way I would read it. Cause I think like too, like, yeah, people who don't 3-bet bluff a lot are going to tend to do their 3-bet bluffs on the button when they're chip leader, like, cause that is in their brain. They're like, oh, this is when I should do it. Right. So that's where I expect early position 3-bets to usually be super strong, and then late position 3-bets to be a little bluffier, And eventually, Gary, we're going to teach you how to use that stuff against people. Like you're going to play, once COVID's gone and you start playing in some of those $500 Hard Rock tournaments where there's a lot of people like me and Marco. I mean, Florida has some really good players. You'll be able to use some of these reverse tools against them, where like we're going to teach you to 3-bet bluff off of like 25 big blinds, because it'll make them think that you look like you have aces. They're gonna be like, oh, that guy just has aces over there. But in actuality, you're gonna have ace 5 suited, and we taught you where to do that as a bluff effectively, right? And it's all like the flip side. Like we're like looking at it from this side, and like he looks strong or he doesn't. So we learn the things that will look strong and weak to good players, so you can manipulate their perception and actually bluff them, And I think that'll be one of the best tools, because we're not going to teach you, to be as good as us. Like we've been playing for 15 years like this, but we can teach you how people like us think, and then teach you how to manipulate that perception to your benefit,
When I was quite worried about Vicky, because she called with like 25% of her stack. And I thought that showed a lot of strength, as she wanted to be in this hand.
Agreed.
Though she didn't go all in or 3-bet it.
But that's the key. That's why it's such a narrow area, because you're right. I think her hand is too good in her eyes to fold. So I feel like, but it wasn't good enough to move all in. So she clearly doesn't, you can rule out the top. We call that ruling out the top portion of someone's range. That means she doesn't have aces, doesn't have kings, probably doesn't have queens, might not even have jacks. Like I think those 4 hands she would just move all in with pretty comfortably. So that makes me think that the best hand she has is 10s or 9s, right? And that's the issue, obviously, with us having 8s. Yeah, what are you saying, Marco?
This reminds me so much of the Maria Ho video, where she had the pocket 10s, and she had the perfect opportunity to 4-bet shove all in or something, and she ended up calling with the pocket 10s, and then she folded on flop versus shove that set of 10s. Yeah. So it was like disaster after disaster after disaster. So basically, like that's that sort of situation you will get into flatting here. So that's why I would advocate, like, unless you're a really, really good player, even myself, I don't think I would flat here, even if Focus Novi would tell me to flat, because like it's really hard to play 7s out of position or 8s, 9s. What do you do on flop? Which is exactly. It's kind of hopeless. GTO solvers might tell you something like this, because like again, they have defined ranges. It's like your computer tells you, oh, he has this range. my eights are good here. When there's jack and queen, I go with it, you know, or whatever, you know, like it can do some calculation we can't do in our head. So maybe they can base some very marginal calls, which our human mind can't really do. Maybe that's also something to keep in mind. And
Yeah.
again, remember, they have defined ranges. We don't have 100% ranges. That's the difference.
I remember, Gary, like when I came up with that rule of never cold flat a 3-bet, I was playing with Seth that day at the WSOP main event. And I remember he got into a big pot like that because like this is the way it works. Okay. So there was, you know, a couple of good players at our table. This one guy, Joe Sirac, who's like a really good aggressive professional. You know, he's playing aggressive and Seth sees him being aggressive, right? And so like Seth thinks that means that immediately he can be bluffing. Well, there was a hand where someone opened in early and then Joe 3-bet from early position and Seth cold called. Okay. And then the flop comes out nothing. Joe bets, Seth calls, Joe bets, Seth calls. We get to the river, like same thing. Seth flips over jacks and mucks them, and Joe had like kings. And he's like, oh, the guy's so aggressive, I can't fold. And I was like, well, in actuality, maybe you can, you know, like, because if you go through my process of never cold flat a 3-bet, that means that Seth would have just made a really tight fold with the jacks there, and he wouldn't have gotten into all of that. And once in a blue moon, Joe is bluffing there pre-flop, but even if Joe is bluffing with ace-5 suited or 8-9 suited pre-flop, and Seth cold flats him with the jacks there, Joe's probably going to win a lot of those hands post-flop, whether it's by hitting out, bluffing, the initiative, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just hard to win in that scenario. So I'd almost rather you guys fold what might be the best hand rather than engage in an almost unwinnable scenario. You know what I'm saying? Like, to me, the one outlier / exception to that rule might be if you had like ace king suited. So if Seth had ace king suited in that spot, I think it might be okay to call because like I said, I think some of the hands Joe would bluff with pre-flop, ace king might be dominating. I think if Seth flats ace king there, it's actually under repped. And then I think he has that extra 10% of the time he hits the nut flush draw that he can roll with too. So like that seems to me the one exception. Outside of that, like honestly, if I'm sitting there, like the spots you'll run into the biggest trouble with, you'll have 9s, 10s, jacks, and you'll see a raise and a 3-bet. And you're like, what do I do? Right. And I'll be the first to say, whatever you do, it's tough. It's going to be awkward. Like those spots really suck. And that's why I kind of advocate just straight up folding or jamming in those spots, you know, because I think when you call, it ends up getting really, really tricky post, kind of like a Marco alluded to in that infamous Maria Ho hand. So yeah, I mean, I would stick to the whole do not cold flat a 3-bet thing. And I think it'll help you avoid awkward spots, to be quite honest.
Actually, I would like to add to this, like, 2 of the most painful hands, what comes to my mind from this lack of discipline preflop. So one hand was final table, 20K on top. So I'm sitting maybe 3rd, 4th place, you know. One Finnish guy opens, maybe it was like hijack or something. I don't remember the exact stack sizes. So he opens, he's fairly aggressive player. Then the chip lead with he was kind of spewy, fish type player, he like makes a very small 3-bet. So then I have pocket jacks. Okay, so I'm like, okay, I need to get involved here, you know, like, but the thing is, the truth was my stack size was like maybe 30 something, you know, like I can make a 4-bet fold versus the chip lead. If he jams, I can always fold. Okay, easy decision, right? But what if the Finnish guy jams? Of course, he snap jams after I 4-bet like make super small 4-bet, right? Of course, the Finnish guy jams, he had like maybe 25. So, and the fish folds. So I need to now call, but when he snap jams, I know it's aces, kings, or queens. And he has kings. And I lose the pot, I'm out 9th place. I mess up. So what if I just fold? Because it was always going to be awkward spot if I 4-bet. Even though technically, yes, I can do it and still fold to chip lead. It's actually the chip leader. If he jams, he only has like queens plus ace king maybe once a day, but I can easily fold. So I thought that was smart play by me. But after thinking about it, I should just fold. And other hand was turbo tournament, maybe 10K on the top, and it was somebody open kind of early position. Then this like fun player, kind of tight player, he 3-bets him. And I have ace queens off on the button. So I'm like, okay, I guess I need to get involved here. So again, instead of like folding, because my first instinct was like, okay, I need to fold here, but it's ace queen off. maybe I'll play, because at that point it was kind of late stages. It's 6, 7 players at the table. So you feel like you need to get involved. And again, I 4-bet very small. He calls, flop comes ace high. I think he jams or something. I'm like, okay, it was like ace king 3 or something. So I pretty much snap call. I can't fold. So he has ace king. I'm like, God damn it. So my 4-bet is terrible if he's just flatting ace king, because I thought he would jam all the better hands so I can actually play against some ace jack or something or whatever he will flat, right? But again, when he flats ace king, I got on. But both these hands, what you learn from this is that just fold pre-flop. Both cases, I had this weird stack size, and it was always going to be super weird. Just fold those spots because you will end up hating when you lose these spots. And those both hurt a lot. It was just like, why did I get involved? And you knew it was going to be a bad idea.
I like a few of the things he said in there too. He said things like, I can't, like we always say that, like anytime your brain's like, I can't fold here, like you think of the relative nature of stuff. Like jacks are a monster hand in the scenario he described. However, Marco is in 3rd place at the beginning of the final table. So there's ICM considerations at play. So there's points when you can consider making tight folds if there's just no reasonable way to play them. Now, if Marco is in 7th place with 9 left in that scenario, then it's an easy all in. There's no ICM considerations at play, right? You let it rip and we see what happens. But anytime you're one of the chip leaders at a final table and there's money considerations on the line, make sure you don't do things like, I can't fold my jacks or I can't fold my ace king. You can do interesting things when real money is on the line. Like you can make big folds or odd shoves. It just kind of depends on the relative nature of your stack size. Like I think people fail to understand that like 17 blinds in one tournament is vastly different than 17 blinds at another tournament. You know what I'm saying? So like it really matters what place you were in when we're talking about final table stuff relative to your other opponents,
Yeah, exactly. Although it's kind of funny spot because like if that final table I have queens, I just shove. So I felt like the jacks was the between hand, which I just 4-bet fold. But like in the end, when I think about maybe we should just jam queens and just fold jacks every day. It's
I
like,
think it's reasonable.
It's super awkward spot. It's like maybe you should fold jacks, 10s, 9s all day and just shove queens, ace king. That's it. Like that's kind of weird. But like now after looking at it back, of course, it's more painful because you lost it, right? If I would have won it, I would never remember this hand, right?
Agreed.
So it's always a little bit, the hands you lose, those hurt the most. But like, maybe it's one of those spots you actually want to just fold jacks, shove queens plus. It's kind of weird. Like, seriously.
I think you got to always just compare it to what's going on at the exact moment. And that's what's cool about poker, that there's moments where ace high makes sense to call and then like a low flush makes sense to fold. Like that's what's so beautiful about this game, right? I mean, so I guess in the end with this spot, we probably shove, like Marco said, like ace queen suited plus, 9s plus, like 10s plus, right around there. And then I guess if we were deeper here, we could call. What do you think?
Yeah, I assume Gary folded here or?
Yeah, what ended up happening?
I folded.
Yeah,
I texted you a picture of what happened, and it was really surprising.
What did they show up with?
Because Crack Kills ended up having an ace jack, and Vicky had an ace 5 suited that she called.
Wow, Marco was totally right about Vicky's range. I gave her way too much credit.
No, I wasn't really specifying Vicky because I was playing,
and so the flop was ace 5-5.
Oh.
Yeah, wow. I can't believe she had ace 5 suited there with the cold call. I thought for sure she'd realize that could just go in the muck. That's interesting to note, though. And I mentioned earlier, I think like the older crowd skews less into, really playing their smaller pairs, but maybe more into ace X suited. Maybe that's harder for people to let go that we give credit to. And I always look at stuff like that. Like I think trying to figure out what population are doing, whether it's 20-year-olds, 70-year-olds, men, women, tight, old, like these are the types of things we need to get used to make better informed decisions. Like I find it funny when someone's like, okay, this guy did this, what do you do? I'm like, well, there's a huge difference if the guy's 80 years old or if the guy's 25, or like, so like, it's always good to look at those differences. That's crazy. Let me pull up the other.
So Gary, what is your play now then when you see ace 5?
What I see ace 5. I like ace 5 if I'm in position and I can,
No, he means what would you have done now that you know what
now
she
that
had?
you know Vicky can have ace 5 suited here?
I might have jammed there because I knew that crack was pretty aggressive, and I knew
Yeah.
I have to call off her whole stack.
I guess
So
you know next
Absolutely, yeah.
time if you have sixes, sevens, you can probably push.
I was
Yeah,
pretending-
exactly.
I didn't want to
Makes it
play
fun.
against
Yeah.
both of them.
Yeah.
I was a little bit concerned about that.
Look at this.
Yeah,
Look
but
at the
when
second
you
hand right
see
away.
data like this, you just next time you just have to be super happy with eights. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
next
what's cool.
time-
That's why it's great to look at this stuff. Like I talk to Dave about this often. Like Dave pays attention to the hands that he's not in and takes notes. And it's amazing how often I'll see something where like I'll like bet the whole way and then someone just bets pot into me on the river. And I look at my note and I'll have a note that says so and so snap bet pot with the nuts on the river, and I can fold, you know? So like
Uh-huh.
taking notes and stuff, bots like this can be really helpful, especially when you have unusual opponents who might do things that you can kind of pick up on in the future. And look at this, of course, right in the next hand, crack is over betting pot, right? Again, to keep up with his brand. So what happened
Yeah.
pre-flop in this one? I take it folded you on the button and
So
you
it
opened?
folded around to me, and then I was either faced with, do I want to call and then if they raise pre-flop, just call them, or do I want to go all in and shove with the king six? And I elected to call, and Sarah called, or Kara is her name, and crack called. And I was thinking, okay, if a king comes or if a king comes, king high comes, I'm all in. If a flush draw comes, I'm not sure. And then the flush draw came and crack bet it. When I look back now, I just think I should have called him and just went and hope I hit the flush, because I had the nut flush draw. I looked at this afterward and said, my plan.
No. So I'll tell you what you did here. And this is something important you got to remember. Anytime you find yourself between two suboptimal decision points, it just
Yeah.
means you made a mistake at the prior decision juncture. So I might argue that your pre-flop play was the questionable one. Do you remember what the blinds were here? Like we must have been, are they like 400, 800?
Yeah, they were 400, 800.
So that's where you went wrong. So what should have happened is this should have been probably the worst hand that you just move all in with pre-flop. Because I'm guessing you had somewhere around like 7 or 8 blinds pre-flop, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, 7.5 big blinds.
Yeah, and this is the final table now.
No, this is we were down to 12.
Final table bubble, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there was two tables of 6. We had to get to 9 to get to the final. So
Yeah, and then the 5. Okay, I guess
Gotcha.
shoving king sixes.
So what, Marco, okay, let's just assume right now that we have about 6,200 chips here. Blinds are 400, 800. So that's like 8 big blinds. And then those were the stacks of the big blind. What would be your shoving range when it folded you on the button here, Marco?
Well, this sounds kind of good, to be honest. Like, because we kind of know crack kills is probably going to be calling close to Nas or something. Like, I don't think he will be like the guy who's gonna like undercall here, right? He wants to gamble, right?
Yes,
Everybody knows he likes
he might
gamble.
call queen, like he might call queen 8, queen 9 off. I would probably assume, right?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah,
that
he
fair to
would.
assume? Yeah.
So it's like we still need to take ICM in the consideration here. I think 5 out of 12 plays left. There's a little bit ICM here. You should probably not shove based on NAS ranges here. So I think taking out some hands like what you could, for example, shove with NAS is like something like king 3 off, right? Like you're definitely not shoving king 3 off here.
Yeah.
So I think something like king 7 off sounds reasonable, and any suited king, queen 6, stuff like that, queen 6, jack
So
7
you think
suited,
king,
7
king
suited.
2 suited would be fine, right?
I think it's fine. Like actually it plays fairly well compared to like even like, let's say king 2 suited is, for example, plays better than king 6 off, right? So it sounds like it's kind of poor hand, but it plays pretty well even if somebody calls.
And
Because
Gary,
when you
good
think
rule
about
of thumb, but think of it through the lens of what he's calling you with. Like, so when like Marco says king 2 suited plays pretty well against what he calls, well, that's because a lot of the stuff crack might call with might be like ace 3, queen 9, 8, 9 suited. If you think about all the hands he's calling with, king deuce suited is often going to be live against that range, right? Because he's very seldom ever going to have a deuce. And then, he's probably not calling with like king 7 off either. So that's what he's saying by you'd play well against that range. So sorry, continue, Marco.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, like the king deuce is fairly good because like again, if he calls you like ace 3, you still have deuce is still your out. If he calls ace queen, deuce is still your out. It doesn't matter that you have like but the flush draw matters. That flush draw, I mean, you have a suited hand that matters. So, and against any better hand, you still have way more outs than with the king deuce offsuit. So
Bingo,
that really matters in this case. But yeah, I don't know if he would actually call Nash ranges. Like when looking at Nash ranges here, he would need to call king deuce off here. So
no, he won't call that
he's
wide.
probably
I
not
think he
calling
would
that
call. I think he would call with like king. Okay, so if we shove like 8 blinds here, I bet Crack's calling with like king 8, king 9 off, king 5, king 6 suited, probably like queen 9 plus, ace 2 suited plus, probably any ace actually, right?
Well,
Yeah,
then
he'd
we
probably
should
call with
definitely
any ace.
any ace is a easy call. Yes.
Yeah.
So
And
when
so
I'm
the
sitting
idea though,
there-
Gary, think of their calling range before you move all in. You know, like the less fold equity you have, the less inclined you need to be to move all in widely on the button and try to steal, right? But the more fold equity you have, we're actually inclined to move all in. Like you're almost so low here, I get nervous. Like I'd almost rather have like 12 blinds and move all in with this hand, as weird as it sounds, because if you shoved all in on the button with 12 blinds with king 6 suited, they're not calling with like king 7 off, king 8 off, king 9 off, you know? Like you're just not getting called by hands that are dominating you a lot. Here, when we're so low, he actually does call with some of those. So I think it's really important to not necessarily just like look at like, okay, Marco and I tell you to shove this range, or, you know, the Nash equilibrium says shove this range, but think of it through the lens of what they might call you with, right? So like another example of that is like, you know, be careful when you're rejamming or jamming with like ace 2 off, ace 3 off, stuff like that, especially if you know your opponent's going to call you with ace 5, ace 6, ace 7, right? Like think about hands that might fold when you move all in, or hands that might call, and that should help you shape your own jamming range, essentially, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense. So, yeah, so, I mean, I could have went all in. I have a hard time, me personally, like going all in with a king X suited, an ace X suited. I could have went all in very, immediately there.
But let me point out that that's what's interesting. I believe like against other people, it's different against Crack. I almost like shoving a king 6 suited more than like an ace 3, because like I was saying, I don't think you get called by king 7, king 8, king 9, king 10 as readily as you get called by ace 4, ace 5, ace 6, ace 7, ace 8, right? So it's like, I think with the ace high, they're more inclined to call you with hands that are dominating you. Whereas with the king high suited, I think you're going to be live a bit more often, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense.
Here's weird too. Like I could see you wanting to gamble at this point. There's also a chance he has like 7, 8 of hearts, you know, and you're in great
True.
shape.
Let me.
What do you think here now, Marco? It's
yeah,
kind of
I've
tough.
been
I
just
think it's like
looking
a
at
damned
this
if you
spot.
do, damned if you don't spot now. And that's why I like moving all in pre-flop.
I just have some ranges here. This should be like around, it's not going to be like spot on because I'm kind of throwing these stack sizes here. Something, we don't have like, is this, I'm sending picture there. Maybe you can open it on the screen, ICM ranges, but this should be the range what you could potentially shove from the button. But I would like to point out one thing to Gary here. I think this is very interesting. I think this will surprise you. And first of all, I think it will be, I think it will make you more confident in shoving king 6 suited. I will show you this. Are you able to open it, Grayson? It's in the chat.
Yeah. I'm just going to reshare my screen.
I think you'll be kind of surprised by this fact in a sense in this scenario. By the way, the calling rates is very similar to what Grayson said in terms of ICMizer. So I sent 2 pictures there.
Can you see that now?
So that's the shoving range. So you see that king 6 off is kind of marginal. So king deuce, it's good. So something like king 6 off, maybe that's just like, it's so marginal that's just fold, right? Yep. So it seems pretty much what we were guessing. So seems reasonable.
This is the range he should move all in with on the button with 8 blinds. Is that what you said?
Yeah, in this ICM situation, like this is with the ICM in fact, taking account. And then look at the second picture. I think this will shock you a little bit, Gary. I think it means like you don't need to be scared. Okay, let me.
This is the king 6 suited, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because it always shocks me. Like, is
that good?
Yeah. So look at the number in the top right. hero bust probability. So if you go all in with king six suited, you're only out of this tournament 27.46% of the time. That seems kind of low, right?
Yeah.
But when you think about it,
especially for
like,
how short we are.
yeah, think about it. Like, this is like getting ace king versus ace queen, and it's worse than this, right? Like, I mean, this is pretty good. This is almost like aces versus fives. Like, when you think about it, like 20%, 20-80, like your chance to bust here is only 27%. It's not high.
Yeah.
Like, when we talk about like, oh my God, I don't want to push here because I'm gonna bust, but the chance of you busting is actually not that high. So that's something to keep in mind. Like, I'm always shocked by this number. I'm like, oh my God, it's only 30%. Wow. And you feel like, because I think it's also our human mind that we remember the times when we pushed the king six, exactly like the situation when I busted with the jacks, ace queen off, making foolish play. You always remember the times when you bust, but you never remember the time when it got through. And in this case, you will win 73% of the time this spot, which is kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, 1 out of 4 times you go bust, and then that means like half the time you just steal the pot and increase your stack by a substantial amount, and then a quarter of the time you more than double up. Like, that's like, we're really stoked about numbers like that, and that's why fold equity is so important, right? Because if you take a spot where you have no fold equity, well, now you're gonna bust like 40-45% of the time in a lot of spots. You know what I'm saying? Because it's so important the X number of times that they just fold and you take the free money in.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, next time, if you fold this hand, maybe next time you can push, you have to take the spot where your bust probability is 40-50, like Grayson said. So actually skipping these spots might put you in the spots where you actually have to flip. So have to flip way more. So keep this in mind, but like, this always helped me, like when I consider these spots, like, should I gamble here? Well, it's not much of a gamble if you win 73% of the time, right?
Right.
So.
Oops, can you still see it now? Or?
Since I didn't do that, and then now on the flop, when crack bets, and I fold, I mean, I had probably 9 outs twice if I called them. So the question is, should I just have called him and hoped I hit a heart on the 9 out twice?
You did find some interesting spots, that's for sure.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Marco.
No, Gary found interesting spots because like these are both like, kind of this vomit in your mouth,
Yeah, no real answer, yeah.
Yeah, it's very tough. But again, I don't believe he would ever play 10 like this. That's my first instinct.
Bingo. I love that you said that. That is the first thing that needs to pop into your head. He would never play a 10 like this. So that means what he has either an ace, he has another heart draw, or he has a straight draw. So it's like, and that's the thing, like if he has queen jack with the jack or the queen of hearts, we're in pretty good shape. You know what I'm saying? So that's what's also interesting as well. Or if he has like 3-5 of hearts, we're also in good shape. Those are the parts that make it a little tempting. Like him being so crazy, I almost wouldn't hate it if you called, just because I could see a universe where our king high is good right now. And then I also completely agree with what Marco said. He never has the 10,
And
I knew he didn't have a 10.
Did you limp pre-flop or raise?
I just limped.
And that's where we should have shoved too, I think. And that's another thing too, because this spot's so tough, but I think a lot of it's because we shouldn't have limped pre.
Okay, so this is pretty interesting. So I don't think small blind has too many ace-x, because like a lot of ace-x would shove pre-flop or raise potentially. So there's probably like
a 10 though. Small blind could be trapping with a 10 for sure, obviously, right? Yeah.
Yes, for sure. They have all the 10s. That's kind of worrisome because that's going to be a big part of their range for sure.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm thinking here. We need to be concerned about the small blind because they are going to have a lot of 10s. I mean, would they flat something like 10-8 off, 10-7 off? Is this something they will call?
I don't know.
Jack 10 off, queen 10 off, king 10 off, ace 10 off, definitely, right?
It might just be those, and then 9-10 I think would be the bottom-ish range. But I don't know. I could see him for like a half a blind. I think the deeper you get in these things, people are pretty happy to take a free flop when they can, or a cheap flop rather. So like maybe 10-7 does make its way in there.
And then there's like these bottom aces. But that's the funny thing. I actually think the small blind might fold ace as well. If the crack shoves, you call. He should probably fold ace. So that's another thing, right?
If crack doesn't. Oh, Sarah would. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think that's the good thing that, like if you think about Sarah's range here, she will end up folding the ace-x actually. So that's another good thing. So if you go all in here, so basically only thing which calls you is 10x, I think, to be honest. So
That makes sense,
that's
yeah.
positive. So I'm just putting king of hearts. This is but it is a tough spot, like 10 of clubs.
The more I thought about it, the more I'm listening to you guys, I think even though I may have made a mistake by not going in pre-flop, I think I should have called and just went all in here. I do agree. When I'm thinking of all the different hands he could have, yeah, he could have straight draw, heart draw, an ace. My king might have already been good.
So like Gary, if we took a step back and you had just called me on the phone and said, I had a king high flush draw and he put me all in, or like basically should I be getting it in with no fold equity? I'd probably just say no, right? But then when
Yeah.
we look at the actual board and we look at the player and we see the stack sizes, and then like you said, we start going through what hands he might actually have, then it becomes interesting because like Marco said, he doesn't have a 10. It's even a weird line to take with an ace. Like check calling makes more sense with the ace, right? So like I'm suddenly thinking that maybe he does have a worse draw at times. Then it definitely seems interesting to gamble. And it's worth noting that we only have like almost 2 times the pot. Like we're pretty low at this point too. So the lower you get, I think the more inclined you should be to gamble.
But yeah, it's probably close. It's probably close because the caller's still behind. Like it's not, you'll be in kind of bad shape. And it's tough to say from crack kills. Maybe he has 10x. If he has 10x, this is way worse. Like that's
That'd
just our
crazy.
assumption.
I mean, I do sometimes see people do that. They sometimes bet pot with like nutted hands. Like it's definitely not out of their purview, but it would surprise me here for sure.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think like these are spots kind of like, you know, you can flip a coin. You can either go with it or fold. I don't think there's definite answer here. I think either way, it's okay. Like I don't hate you folding. I don't hate you calling. You know, I don't hate you raising. So
Yeah.
I think it's a very tough spot, and either way, it's going to be close. So
Yeah.
I think these spots, don't feel bad about folding. Don't feel bad about going all in. In the end, I don't think it matters too much. I think it's going to be either way very close.
And also, like, I definitely do think this should be one of the bottom end hands that you move all in on the button with for around your 8, 9, 10 big blinds or whatever. But I also think king 6 suited, like, I think your instinct is kind of onto something, because I do think king X suited, like king 5 through king 8 suited, could be an effective limp at certain places on the button, but it's only in a very specific spot. And it's where we're looking at like 2 blinds who might reshove a lot over your open or something, you know? So it's a reasonable hand to consider limping the button with. I think, you know, you might be dominating some of the random stuff they hit pairs with, but in general, it's going to behoove you to be raising on buttons and not open limping, I would say.
Yeah, true.
These are good spots, dude. These are really good. I know Alex and I think Jose was in. I think he head back to work at some point. I didn't know if Alex had any questions that he wanted to run by beforehand too.
I think you had some question we could still consider answering.
Yeah, I gotta jump off in a few minutes too. So
yeah.
No, sounds good, man. Good stuff today, Gary.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We could still check the Juhas. Yeah, very good hands. But yeah, looking at this, like if our perceived ranges are correct, we will be like 75% versus his, you know, whatever flush draw board, maybe some ace-x, we will be like 70%, I guess. If it's very heavy on draws, we are like 70%. But if there's some ace-x too, then we will be 55%. So it goes down very quickly. We need roughly 30, 36, 35% here. So I think with the player behind, when we are going pretty bad shape, I think it's close. Yeah. And if crack kills has any 10s, it becomes kind of bad for us, to be honest.
Yes.
So
yes. But that's why ranging is so important. Just keep ranging your opponents. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I think people like freeze up a lot and they'll be like, oh, I'm scared of this. I go, okay, well, what combination of flush draw are you scared of? You know what I'm saying? So like, that's the thing. You can't just be like, he might have a draw. I want you to be like, he could have 7-8 of hearts. He could have 9-7 of hearts. Like start listing these things in your head. Practice, get used to assigning ranges. He could have queen jack off with the jack of hearts. You know, like the better you get at kind of just doing ranges like that, the more clear cut your decisions become. Because on the surface, again, he's putting you all in. You have no fold equity. You should fold a draw. Makes sense, right? But then suddenly when we look at this particular player and deduce that he might have some worse draws, now maybe we gamble, you know? So I think the key is just keep thinking in terms of ranges for sure.
Exactly.
Okay. All good stuff. I appreciate it.
You're quite welcome. Good job, Gary.
Yep.
Thanks. I'm going to jump off.
Yep.
All right. See
Okay.
you, bud.
Thank you very much.
Good luck
Bye.
this week.
Take care.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So we could still cover quickly the Juho's questions. I think that those were pretty interesting. It's in the chat. How do I open the chat? Okay. So again, no ICM, it's a little bit higher.
I got it. Yeah.
No ICM considerations. Would you rather defend or jam 15 to 20 big blinds against MB open, king, queen off, king, queen suited, ace 10 suited, ace 10 off? Where you would most likely to get called by better or just defend those hands, and why?
Yeah, great question. I mean, right, what jumped off the bat to me was that king, queen off and king, queen suited, I'd probably, well, the offsuit varietals, I definitely like jamming more, but I think king, queen versus ace 10, I prefer shoving the king, queen, because I think it ends up being in better shape against a lot of stuff that calls us, you know, like jacks, 10s, 9s, 8s, 7s, we're flipping all those, ace, jack, ace 10. Whereas the ace 10 just isn't really dominating anything when it gets called, and it's only flipping 9s, 8s, 7s. So yeah, and then I also think if you have ace 10 suited, maybe defending makes sense sometimes because you keep his like ace X offs in that opened and stuff too. What do you think, Marco?
Well, I think this is very player dependable. Like,
yeah,
if I'm opening MP, I'm shoving all these hands.
yeah, exactly.
So
exactly.
again, it depends. Like, poker is so dependable who is opening. Are they opening GTO ranges? Are they opening? So I think a lot of these questions are type of thing you should consider who is doing what sort of range. Like I did last session. You know, last session we were looking at spot hijack open, and he was way out of line. He was opening hijack. He opened king 6 off, right? Wow. So now in our big blind, we should play like we play normally versus button because he's opening king 6 off, right?
That makes sense.
So now hijack, we play like button because he's opening king 6 off, which is shocking. So in these sort of situations, you just need to widen your range. Only way to punish guys opening too wide is to shove wide.
Thank you. I'm so glad you said that. I'm so exhausted with people saying they're punishing someone by calling. I never understand that.
That
I'm
only
like,
punish
you're
themselves.
Punishing yourself, dude. Exactly. You nailed it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that is true. But like when looking at some GTO graphs here, in general, I do think population calls pit too tight compared to GTO because like even if you look at like button raise call, cutoff raise call situations, nobody calls raise calls like king 10 suited, for example, which would be like called by GTO programs. So I think population isn't calling us wide as they should. I think that's the first thing. So usually we can get away shoving bit wider than what these softwares are saying. If it's like, again, in this, we are not considering ICM, whatever. I think these hands could be profitable jam. But you know, I think either way, it's not going to make like huge amount of money, I think. So
yeah, well said. And I agree with what you said. All four of them probably just shoving. And there are some really interesting spots Juho will get into eventually with you. Like the one that pops out to me that's really weird is if it folds around a small blind and he limps and you have like 23 blinds in the big blind with like ace king. Like that's one of those kind of classic, oh, my battery's low. One of those kind of classic spots where it's like, you don't want to jam because he just folds, right? But then if you like 3X, you just create these horrible post flop spots, right? So there are some weird spots like that where we have these premium hands and we're either eliciting folds or awkward calls. And this one can be similar where it's like, maybe we feel like ace 10 suited, he's just folding worse. So we want to call to get some value, but then we end up losing post flop anyway. And we're like, crap, we should have shoved anyways, you know? So there is the very delicate line in those spots for sure. But I think what Marco said, leaning towards shove and when it's close in most of those spots is going to suit you best.
Yeah, exactly. And like still, I still think people play better as a shove than call out of position in general.
Yeah.
Like even these king high, ace high hands, it's not that easy to play, to be honest. Like because a lot of time, like Solver World, you have some ace x hand like 50% call, 50% fold. It's like, okay, so what do you do? Like, what do you do with these hands? It's like, and then it's telling like your edge playing this hand is like nothing, but you just have to call it because you defend your range or something. So
Yep.
I think to avoid those spots is probably better idea. Just fold.
Yeah, well said.
So that's something to consider. But what about if you include ICM pressure? In what point would you defend solid broadways? I'm not sure about the question in terms, does it mean like shoving or pre-flop? I think I'm still calling the suited hands. If there's, again, what sort of ICM pressure? That's another question. Is this final table? How are the other stacks? So I think ICM is very
dependent.
Yeah, very dependent on the other stacks of the table. If you're the shorter stack, you can probably call because, like, again, by far, if you're the shorter stack, there's not that big ICM pressure. But like, again, that's something we will definitely cover in our sessions as well.
Yeah.
This ICM is definitely something we will do more. So don't worry about it. We will definitely look at final tables, what sort of ranges we should defend, and so on. What should we jam? If there's any other questions, please let us know now.
Yeah, good stuff today, guys.
Yeah, if not, save it for the next month. But like, and we will always try to like improve in these sessions, like first of all, our own sessions and see what you guys want to have more. And so if there's any feedback you want to give us, please give it to us. And, you know, we just need to make sure that you are improving. And I think this is one of the best ways to make sure when you actually have interaction with the coaches. So.
For sure. Yeah. Awesome. Good stuff today, guys.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, gentlemen. Talk to you guys later. See you. Good luck this week.
Good luck.